Majority of young people who call themselves socialists do not understand socialism. That's true.
There are a few things in this world as guaranteed to piss me off as the misuse of political terms and terminology, because precision is important in discussing these things. It's important to know what we're talking about, not to mischaracterize the other person's position. You know, you need to understand these concepts. Now, I quite rate Tim Pool. I watch a lot of his stuff, and I think he at least strives to be honest and accurate in everything that he does. But when it comes to these political issues, he is as clueless as a newborn baby goat.
So I have a friend who said that she was a democratic socialist, and I started asking her some questions. I said, first, let me try and figure out where you are politically. Do you believe that if you do work, you should be allowed to keep the fruits of that labor for yourself? And she said yes. I said, congratulations, you're not a socialist.
That's not socialism.
She's actually more likely a social democrat, somebody who believes in a capitalist system, but a strong welfare state.
That's socialism. It's not entirely Tim's fault, right? You've had decades upon decades, getting on to about a century of propaganda against even the slightest bit of left-wing thought. You had Joe McCarthy. America set itself up in opposition to communism, right? So anything that smacked of left-wing politics whatsoever was treated with absolute and abject suspicion. Yeah, I don't exactly blame Tim. I mostly blame American culture and the American education system.
No, he is an idiot. We have purposely trained him wrong, as a joke.
Look, I've banged on about this till my fingers are bleeding and my forehead is raw, okay? There's plenty of other videos on this. So the short version of this is that socialism and Marxism are not interchangeable. Socialism and communism, these aren't interchangeable ideas. Socialism is its own ideology, separate from and predating Marxism. To confuse matters, however, the Marxists have co-opted the term socialism. In communism, in Marxist theory, socialism is a transitional state in Marx's kind of evolution of government and society, where everything is brought into the control of the state in the name of the people as a precursor to the state withering away and everything being held in the commons. Of course, it doesn't work like that, but that's the communist, Marxist definition of socialism. Socialism as its own ideology is merely concerned with equality, fairness, treating people the same, giving people greater opportunities, all that sort of thing. It's a fairly nebulous and not particularly well-defined general left-wing liberal term. Okay? The Marxists co-opted the term in a story that's ironic and quite interesting, I think. See, the preceding socialism, the preceding ideas of equality, fairness, fair pay for fair work, equality before the law, doing away with the hierarchies of control that existed at the time, like monarchies and so on, that was taken to be utopian by the Marxists. They regarded the ideas of the utopian socialists as being kind of out there and kooky, and that they wouldn't work. So utopian socialists believed that you could persuade the captains of industry, the monarchs, the governments, to voluntarily give up power to the people, and that you could persuade the people that a degree of collectivization, of working together towards common good was something that you could sell them on. And that you could lead by example, in that you could set up communes or cooperatives, different company setups, things like that, so that you could lead by example and you could show the people that it was possible, and that then the ideas would spread because they were successful. Okay, this was regarded as pie-eyed optimism and utopianism by the communists, particularly Engels, the taller of the two statues behind me, who wrote a diatribe against the utopian socialist. The utopian socialist was meant to be a kind of slur, right? And so the Marxists co-opted the term, but they called what they wanted to do to revolt, to take over society, to overthrow the establishment through violent means if necessary, at least in later interpretations. They regarded that as scientific socialism. They believed that their ideas were rooted in science. And so they decried the utopian socialists as being unrealistic, unscientific, and so on. Of course, the irony in all this, as we found out during the 20th century, is that if Marxism were truly scientific socialism, then surely all the failed experiments, which all fail at pretty much the same point, that is the Marxist definition of socialism, if it was truly scientific, you would think that they would stop repeating the same experiment after a couple of catastrophic failures and revise the theory or try something new, but that hasn't particularly been the case. Rather, there is a kind of ideological faith in Marxism that still carries on to this day. And meanwhile, it's the utopian socialists, the likes of Robert Owen and so on, who have been proven true, essentially. That's just how it's worked out. People have, by and large, been persuaded. Pretty much every first world nation, even America, has some kind of welfare system. We've gotten to the point where the very rich in places like Silicon Valley and so on are finally learning some sort of noblesse oblige. They might be failing. The censorship and so on social media, it comes from a good but misplaced place. They've realised the power that they've got, and they want to use it for the betterment of society and the betterment of people. They're just cocking it up in a similar way to the way Marxism cocks it all up in their version of socialism. But by and large, we have social institutions, we have welfare institutions, by and large, with a few notable exceptions. We have universal healthcare, and perhaps most tellingly, the final victory of utopian socialists is universal basic income, I think, and that is now very much on the agenda.
Every American gets $1,000 a month. The freedom dividend.
Well, that's going to get me in trouble for not pushing Rachel Haywire, who's one of the potential candidates for the transhumanist party, who's also talking about UBI. But the point is, it's on the agenda now. It's probably some years off, but I think people are starting to come around to and understand that the nature of work and society and so on is changing, and so we need to spread the wealth in an effective way. What's weird, and what is another aspect of this being the final victory of the utopian socialists, is that this is just as popular in some quarters on the libertarian right, amongst the anarcho-capitalist types to an extent. So there you go. Look, the future that utopian socialists want, are aiming for, isn't Fritz Lang's Metropolis. Right, it's Star Trek.
Tea Earl Grey, hot.
It's technological socialism. It's fully automated luxury communism, if you will. That's one way that people like to put it. So when you talk to this friend of yours, Tim, and ask them whether they want to throw all their money into a general pool, or don't they want to keep what they earn, that you're misrepresenting, you're setting up a straw man, and it's little wonder that they're confused, because what you call social democracy is socialism. It's always struck me as weird, right, that so many people are so utterly opposed to the government or the state or the collective getting access to a portion of their wages. But they have almost no complaint about their bosses, about the company that they work for, taking such a huge proportion. You're not getting the value of your work, not the full value of your work. You're getting a fraction. You know, they're profiting from your labour without giving you the full compensation for it. At least with a government, in a democracy, at least with a collectivisation, yeah, you have some say, you have a vote. They're accountable to you in a way that your company is only accountable, and then only a little, to its shareholders. There's a lack of consistency there. The other thing that Tim does that I want to touch on in this video, that was going to take it a little bit long, is in mischaracterizing the American left, you know, the gang, the squad, whatever, Bernie Sanders, and so on, as being far left.
Now, this really pisses me off to no end.
Look, the political compass, it's not great, but it's a useful tool that everybody understands. So here is an image of the prospective 2020 candidates and their positions on the political compass. As you can see, even the furthest left potential candidates from the mainstream parties, at least, are at best centre-left, and then only very slightly left. Now, Tim tries to reframe this within the American political discourse, which is, you know, which is good, but still, right? The compass encompasses history, the full political spectrum around the world, by and large, and so to characterise milquetoast centre-leftists like Bernie Sanders or Tulsi Gabbard as raving extremists is just disingenuous. The American left would be the right in a lot of Europe, a lot of the rest of the world. I recognise that America is different, but characterising them as extremes isn't fair to them, isn't fair to their ideas, misrepresents them. These are milquetoast centrist ideals that they are putting forward. These are milquetoast centrist policies that they're putting forward. All that what passes for the American left really seems to want to implement, if we strategically ignore the bonkers people in the identitarian politics wing, but that exists on the right as well, just in a different way. All they really want to do is to drag America into the 20th century, let alone the 21st century. Things like universal healthcare, shoring up the welfare system, providing more in terms of social investment, and so on, infrastructure, things like this, things that Europeans take for granted, things that the Japanese take for granted, things that most of the civilized world takes for granted. America is different, I admit that, but American exceptionalism, American wealth, American power, you would think that people would be clamouring for that to be spent and implemented upon its own people to a positive end, to provide for Americans, rather than largely being spent bombing little brown people far away on the other side of the world. You would think. Or being invested in new technologies, which America used to lead the world in, to sever your dependence on oil and thereby your desire to drop million-dollar bombs on little brown people on the other side of the world. You would think. That's why so many of us around the rest of the world have such a hard time understanding what is going on in the States, why people don't want what we regard as basic and obvious provisions that make a country a civilized first world nation. Decent education, decent healthcare, decent infrastructure. These aren't radical policies, these aren't radical ideas. Bernie Sanders is not a radical, Tulsi Gabbard is not a radical. But on the right you do have genuine radicals. Trump is probably actually the most left-wing of the Republican candidates, but he is firmly rooted in the authoritarian right. And there can be no mistake about that. And by treating Tulsi and Bernie and others in that kind of political arena in American discourse as extremists, while not treating Trump, etc., as extremists, you're giving a pass to the right, implicitly if not explicitly. And Tim, frankly, I'm worried about you. I don't mean that in a patronising fashion. I've seen Sargon's slide to the right because so many people on the left simply stopped talking to him, stopped making the arguments with him. Yeah, it's hard online to get anyone from the left, the identitarian left or even the traditional left, to talk and to argue. And so there is a natural drift to the right that occurs because they proselytize. And I worry, day in, day out, week in, week out, that Tim is either sliding to the right or being forced to the right, and that would be a shame, as we would lose a very strong, independent, relatively centrist voice in alternative media. And I wish that wouldn't happen. What I'm arguing for here, whether you agree with me on any of the politics or not, it doesn't matter. I don't necessarily mean to promote these. All I really want to promote is accuracy in language, just as we would with science, just as we would with mathematics. Yeah, semantics are important, communication is important. If you're going to use these terms in different ways than they are understood, a lot of hassle can be saved by simply defining what you mean at the start of a conversation, rather than talking past each other. But when you use socialism to mean Marxism, I do not think it means what you think it means. Zang.
It's been over for years. I'm the new rock and roll king of Vegas. So all you commies, step aside.
I do not like rock and roll music. It is too loud.
My